What's up, YouTube? This is JC's World, back with another video. And this time, I'm going to be talking about my first ever shroom trip a couple of days ago. So pretty much, I bought these gummies off online, and they came in a 13 count. And the lowest dose was 3 gummies, and the highest dose was 13 gummies. And since it was my first time, obviously, I took 3 gummies. And I lit some incense, closed the lights, lit some candles, gotta set the vibe, and then I just waited. Now, after a couple minutes, about like maybe 5-10 minutes, I started feeling the effect. Now, the only difference between shrooms and Mary Jane, which I also dabble into, is that Mary Jane dulls you down. It kind of makes you tired, mellow, versus shrooms, which kind of elevates your consciousness. You feel more awake. You're still able to function and do things, but there's an undercurrent of mellowness, kind of, but not the one that makes you tired, but the one that just makes you relax and vibe. But you're still very conscious and able to do stuff, if you get what I'm saying. Now, the first effect that I experienced was a huge shivering. I was hella cold. It was like an Arctic tundra or something like that. I was shivering. I was just shaking the whole entire time. And mind you, my AC was off, my fan was off, and yeah, it was crazy. I had my comforter on, I had my sheets on. And then the next thing that I experienced was pretty much seeing geometric patterns whenever I shut my eyes. So every single time I shut my eyes, I'll see the usual black, of your eyelids closing. But the only difference is I saw all these different swivels and circles and rectangles and all these different shapes. And I'd open my eyes, because I couldn't believe it. I was like, hell no, there's no way that I'm experiencing this right now. Then I shut my eyes again, and boom, I'll see them again. And that let me know that, yes, I was experiencing it. It was real. And then the next thing that I experienced was a huge increase in my typing speed. Now I work with a life coach, and my life coach was the one that recommended that I go on this trip in order to dive deep into my subconscious, dive deep into myself, and basically get to know my higher self and get to know my ego and all the different parts of my consciousness. And so I started taking down notes because I had to take everything down. That way I could let her know exactly everything that happened when I was going to meet up with her on the Zoom meeting every single week. So that's what I did. I was taking down notes, and honestly, a lot of what I typed down was just out of impulse. It wasn't me thinking about what to write down. I just knew what to write down. And I was typing in nanoseconds. It was very scary, very crazy. And then when I stared at the screen, all I saw was these colors. I saw red, blue, green. My screen was changing colors. And then I saw the words on the screen that I typed down. They looked as if they weren't even on the screen. They kind of looked like they were floating around. So yes, that was very crazy, and I did get kind of paranoid. And then the most craziest thing happened, right? I heard this voice, and I live with my mother, right? So I thought that my mom was calling me, so I called out to her. I looked down at my phone again when I realized nobody answered. And then I saw that my best friend, one of my homegirls, had literally called me, and I answered. And the funny thing is, I don't even remember answering at all. Like, I don't remember seeing the call or clicking accept. I was just listening to my meditative music, vibing, and it took me by surprise because I didn't know that I picked up the call. It was random. And so I did speak to my friend for a couple of minutes, and the whole entire time I was feeling paranoid because while I knew that I was speaking to my friend, at the same time, it didn't seem real. It seemed simulated. Like, it seemed like this was something that I just created in my mind. Like, I was creating this scenario in my mind, and it wasn't really happening in real time, even though it was. So just thinking about exactly this increased my paranoia. And thank goodness, after a while, we hung up. actually, the circumstances through which the call ended was weird because what happened was the call was going silent for a couple of times. You feel me? Sometimes whenever I talk to her, she could be in a specific area and maybe the call would end up cutting and you couldn't hear anything. So pretty much that's what happened. And I let her know, hey, I can't really hear you. I'm going to call you back. So I hung up and I called her back twice and she didn't answer. And immediately one of my main thoughts was, did I say something wrong? Did I say something that, that came across wrong to her? Even though I know I didn't, because, I don't be hating on my friends like that. I don't be, having any malice towards any of my friends, you feel me? I'll be very, very supportive as much as I can of them. But even then, my mind was paranoid and I was thinking, did I say something that made her feel some type of way to where she didn't answer the phone? And that increased my paranoia. I became even more fearful and even more paranoid. And basically throughout the whole entire tangent, the paranoia, I was still shivering. I was still cold. And I was, overthinking. I felt so much fear, all the fear that I suppressed, all the fear that I've been holding down and I've been shoving into this little box within myself. It started coming up like Pandora's box opening. And I felt it all at once. It was so overwhelming. It felt like the root of my fear was being ripped off. You feel me? Like, if you hold a plant and then you just rip it off from the ground, that's exactly what it felt like. And so it was an intense experience, a very intense experience. And I do remember taking down notes. And of course, just like before, the words were moving across the screen. Everything was changing color on the screen. I closed my eyes and still saw geometric patterns. And, this was my ever first trip. So I was extremely fearful, extremely just, out of it. And during my trip, one of the most key moments, one of the most very releasing, healing moments, because mind you, I went on this whole trip in order to know more about my inner self. This was a spiritual trip, not just I want to get high on some psychedelic shit, you feel me? So one of the things that happened was, of course, along with all my fears coming about and resurfacing pretty much, a lot of my thoughts and suppressed thoughts surfaced. And I started, envisioning that moment back in 2017 when my grandmother had passed. And I pretty much had envisioned being in the funeral home and looking at the casket and looking at her body laying in the casket. And during that moment, in real time back then, I didn't really take time to grieve or take time to properly process losing my grandmother. And the grandmothers are like the glue to the family. A lot of times they're the ones who hold everyone together. Holidays, birthdays, they're the ones who organize and plan everything. So as soon as my grandmother was gone, everything changed. The whole dynamic changed. So throughout the whole entire time, I didn't really take time to grieve. I really just continued with my academics. I was in high school, still doing my homework, still, getting good grades. And of course, family from out of town that came in and spent time with myself and my mom. And I was occupied with them, so I never really got the time to properly grieve and break down and cry the way that I should have. So during my trip, all the visions, all the memories had resurfaced, and I started breaking down crying for about a good couple of minutes. And I did feel my ego pull back, because whenever I do feel myself crying or about to cry, I do have some pullback. And there's two reasons for this. Number one, society encourages men not to cry, and they say that, oh, you gotta be tough, you gotta be strong. Number two, Of course, on the spiritual level, the ego feels like, oh, I got to protect you. I want you to hurt. I want you to go through this pain. So don't cry. Don't break down. Just chill and vibe. And even though the ego means well and it does want to protect us, protect me, at the end of the day, this toolbox is very outdated and this toolbox is very inefficient and ineffective. So I had to go against the pullback from the ego and allow myself to cry. And that's exactly what I did. And then, of course, aside from me coping and processing and grieving and pretty much healing at that moment from my grandmother's passing, there was a lot of fear that came up that was anticipatory about my mom passing, because one of my greatest fears right now was losing my mom. She's like in her 60s right now. Our relationship always hasn't been the best. And I do hold some resentment towards her over some childhood trauma. And I'm working on that, on releasing that and improving our relationship. But there is some regret on my part on, I should have did better, or things should have been different. And so, thinking about how I may not have that much longer with her, all that fear came up and I ended up crying even deeper. So it's pretty much grieving on top of grieving, sadness on top of sadness. And in the middle of all that, I felt lost. I felt extremely lost. Like I didn't know what was going on for real, to be honest with you. Like I knew, but I didn't know. It was all coming. All the grief, all the sadness, all the pain. All the emotions were just surfacing, and it hit me like a tidal wave. Now, as you can imagine from everything that I said so far, this was extremely crazy and intense. And eventually I did end up finding ways to calm down and relax and ground myself in the middle of the experience. So what I did was I put on some earbuds. Well, I already had my earbuds on, but what I did was I went to my YouTube music and I started playing some rap and some hip hop, something upbeat, something cool, something fun, something that could pretty much help me to balance myself and balance my emotions while I was going through every single thing that I was going through. And eventually, after a couple of minutes, I did end up feeling way better, calming down, And of course, one of the things I like doing, and a lot of people don't notice, is that when I'm in the crib, in the house, and I'm listening to music, I like to vibe, I like to get up and just freestyle, just dance, just move around, have a good time. So that's pretty much what I was doing for a good 5-10 minutes. And then before you know it, from everything that I've told you up until that moment, it had been about like 2-3 hours. So within a couple of minutes, I ended up, coming back to, and all the effects started wearing off, and I felt so drained, as you can imagine, because everything that was suppressed, everything that I didn't even realize that I was holding within myself was coming right up. And that is very draining. That is very tiring. So as soon as the trip was over, I went straight to sleep. I just had to. And then pretty much 2 days later, I did end up speaking to my life coach, and I explained everything to her. And she gave me some great insight and gave me more greater detail on everything that I was experiencing. For instance, she did say that when I closed my eyes and saw the geometric patterns, what I really saw was the veil lifting from my eyes, the veil lifting, and me seeing the matrix, or seeing reality for where it really is, which is nothing but energy, nothing but frequency, just arranged to give out the illusion of physicality. And I'm spiritual, so this is what I believe, and this is what I stand on. Now, of course, not everyone shares this belief. So if you don't, that's completely cool. This is my experience. And she did tell me that when I felt like I was being possessed, and I felt like, mind you, I felt like I was dying. Like I could barely keep track of my breathing, and I could barely even keep track of my heartbeat. I felt like I was literally dying. And she said that was ego dissolution. You feel me? The ego basically dissolved for that whole entire time, and my higher self, my consciousness was what took over. And that was what was typing everything down. That's why, even though in my conscious mind, I was like, what am I even writing? Deep inside, it was exactly what I was writing, because that was my real nature, my true nature, as my higher self consciousness, writing everything down. And so she also let me know that all the grief that I was experiencing, all the sadness, and all the, all the pain that came up, this was a cleaning, a cleansing. This was everything, all the garbage that I've been holding inside, being thrown out. So now inside is clean, you feel me? Everything is purged, everything is replenished, everything is in balance now. And after that trip, I felt so at peace, you feel me? Because I released so much and processed so much that I wasn't throughout all those years. And she had let me know all of this, and I felt very good hearing this, because I knew it was true. And then, she did tell me that was a great thing, that I grounded myself and listened to some music and danced and had a good time towards the end of the trip, because you need to ground. You know what I'm saying? It's very important to ground when you're going through anything, emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. You got to ground yourself, or else you're going to spiral and pretty much go into psychosis and go crazy. And yes, my coach and I had a good talk, and a lot of things got revealed. A lot of things got revealed, let me tell you. And honestly, I've said so much already, but there are things that happened in my trip that were so deep that I cannot even conceptualize it. Like, I can't even tell you guys, because how can I? I can't even find the word to describe it. So everything that I'm saying in this video, it was hard to even make this video, because I didn't even know how to explain my trip. So hopefully you guys were able to comprehend it and understand everything, and it makes sense to you guys. You feel me? So yeah, that was my first ever shroom trip. It was crazy as hell. I do recommend it for anyone who's looking to go deep within themselves and process things and heal and, realize certain things, and basically release certain things that, they have a hard time releasing and processing and basically going through. So that's pretty much it.